Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Next couple of chapters. I'm back in the Cloud House again in Stow. One of my favourite little coffee shops, cafes, art galleries. I've just had a very nice panini. Right, chapter 28, Ahab. So we finally, I hope, meet Captain Ahab now. For several days after leaving Nantucket, nothing above hatches was seen of Captain Ahab. The mates regularly relieved each other at the watches, and for aught that could be seen to the contrary, they seemed to be the only commanders of the ship. Only they sometimes issued from the cabin with orders so sudden and peremptory that after all it was plain they were but commanded vicariously. Yet their supreme lord and dictator was there, though hitherto unseen by any eyes not permitted to penetrate into the now sacred retreat of the cabin. Every time I ascended to the deck from my watches below, I instantly gazed aft to mark if any strange face were visible, for my first vague disquietude, that's a good word, touching the unknown captain, now in seclusion of the sea, became almost a perturbation. This was strangely heightened at times by the ragged Elijah's diabolical incoherences uninvitingly recurring to me, with a subtle energy I could not have before conceived of. But poorly could I withstand them, much as in other moods I was almost ready to smile at the solemn whimsicalities of that outlandish prophet of the wharves. But whatever it was of apprehensiveness or uneasiness, to call it so, which I felt, yet whenever I came to look about me in the ship, it seemed against all warrantry to cherish such emotions. For though the harpooners, with the great body of the crew, were a far more barbaric, heathenish and motley set than any of the tame merchant ship companies which my previous experiences had made me acquainted with, I still ascribed this, and rightly ascribed it, to the fierce uniqueness of the very nature of that wild Scandinavian vocation in which I had so abandonedly embarked. But it was especially the aspect of the three chief officers of the ship, the mates, which was most forcibly calculated to allay those colourless misgivings, and induce confidence and cheerfulness in every presentiment of the voyage. Three better, more likely... I'm going to put the light on. Just hold on a moment. Hold on. That's a bit better. Right, three better. Oh, don't forget my microphone. Three better, more likely sea officers and men, each in his own different ways, could not readily be found, and they were every one of them Americans, a Nantucketer, a Vineyarder, a Cape man. I guess that's Martha's Vineyard, isn't it? Now it being Christmas, when the ship shot out of our harbour, for a space we had biting polar weather, though all the time running away from it to the southward, and by every degree and minute of latitude which we sailed, gradually leaving that merciless winter and all its intolerable weather behind us. It was one of those less lowering but still grey and gloomy enough mornings of the transition, when with a fair wind, the ship was rushing through the water with a vindictive sort of leaping and melancholy rapidity, that as I mounted to the deck at the call of the forenoon watch, so soon I levelled my glance towards the taffrail, foreboding shivers ran over me. Taffrail? Must be a nautical term. Reality outran apprehension. Captain Ahab stood upon his quarterdeck. There seemed no sign of common bodily illness about him, nor of the recovery from any. He looked like a man cut away from the stake, when the fire had overrunningly wasted all the limbs without consuming them, or taking away one particle from their compacted aged robustness. His whole high, broad form seemed made of solid bronze and shaped in an unalterable mould, like Cellini's cat Perseus. Threading its way out from among his grey hairs and continuing right down on one side of his tawny scorched face and neck till it disappeared in his clothing, you saw a slender rod-like mark, lividly whitish. It resembled that particular scene sometimes made in the straight, lofty trunk of a great tree, when the upper lightning tearingly darts down it, and without wrenching a single twig, peels and grooves out the bark from top to bottom ere running off into the soil, leaving the tree still greenly alive but branded. Excuse me. Whether that mark was born with him, or whether it was the scar left by some desperate wound, no one could certainly say. By some tacit consent, throughout the voyage little or no allusion was made to it, especially by the mates. But once Tashtigo's senior, an old, gay-head Indian among the crew, superstitiously asserted that not till he was full 40 years did Ahab become that way branded, and then it came upon him, not in the fury of any mortal fray, but in an elemental strife at sea. Yet this wild hint seemed inferentially negatived by what a grey Manxman insinuated, an old sepulchral man who, having never before sailed out of Nantucket, had never ere this laid eyes upon wild Ahab. Nevertheless, the old sea traditions, the immemorial credulities, popularly invested this old Manxman with preternatural powers of discernment, so that no white sailor seriously contradicted him when he said that if ever Captain Ahab should be tranquilly laid out, which might hardly come to pass, so he muttered, then whoever should do that last office for the dead would find a birthmark on him from crown to sole. Interesting. So powerfully did the whole grim aspect of Ahab affect me, and the livid brand which streaked it, that for the first few moments I hardly noted that not a little of this overbearing grimness was owing to the barbaric white leg upon which he partly stood. It had previously come to me that this ivory leg had at sea been fashioned from the polished bone of a sperm whale's jaw. Aye, he was dismasted off Japan, said the old gay-headed Indian once. But like his dismasted craft, he shipped another mast without coming home for it. He has a quiver of him. I was struck with the singular posture he maintained. Upon each side of the Pequod's quarterdeck, and pretty close to the mizzen shrouds, there was an auger hole, bored about half an inch or so into the plank. His bone legs steadied in that hole, one arm elevated and holded by a shroud. Captain Ahab stood erect, looking straight out beyond the ship's ever-pitching prow. There was an infinity of firmness, fortitude, a determinate, unsurrenderable willfulness in the fixed and fearless forward dedication of that glance. Not a word he spoke, nor did his officers say aught to him, though by all their minutest gestures and expressions they plainly showed the uneasy, if not painful, consciousness of being under a troubled master eye. And not only that, but the moody, stricken Ahab stood before them with a crucifixion in his face, in all the nameless, regal, overbearing dignity of some mighty woe. Ere long, from his first visit in the air, he withdrew into his cabin, but after that morning he was every day visible to the crew, either standing in his pivot hole, or seated upon an ivory stool he had, or heavily walking the deck. And the sky grew less gloomy, indeed began to grow a little genial. He became still less and less a recluse, as if when the ship had sailed from home, nothing but the dead wintry bleakness of the sea had kept him so secluded. And by and by it came to pass that he was almost continually in the air, but as yet, for all he said or perceptibly did on the at last sunny deck, he seemed as unnecessary there as another mast. But the Pequod was only making passage now, not regularly cruising. Another cappuccino, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. Nearly all whaling preparatives needing supervision, the mates were fully competent to that there was little or nothing out of himself to employ or excite Ahab now, and thus chase away. For that one interval, the clouds that layer upon layer were plied upon his brow, as ever all clouds choose the loftiest peaks to pile themselves upon. Nevertheless, Ere long, the warm, warbling persuasiveness of the pleasant holiday weather we came to seemed gradually to charm him from his mood, for as when the red-cheeked dancing girls, April and May, trip home to the wintry misanthropic woods, even the barest, ruggedest, most thunder-cloven old oak at last send forth some few green sprouts to welcome such glad-hearted visitants, so Ahab did in the end, a little respond to the playful allurings of that girlish air. More than once did he put forth the faint blossom of a look which in any other man would have soon flowered out into a smile. So there's Ahab, with an ivory leg and a hole on the deck for it to plug into. Quite like that idea, and it definitely reminds me of Treasure Island and Blackbeard, isn't it? The cook, and how he had a leg and he had ways of skating around the deck on it. Kind of reminds me of that. Chapter 29. Enter Ahab, to him Stubb. Some days elapsed, and ice and icebergs all astern, the Pequod now went rolling through the bright Quito Spring, which at sea almost perpetually reigns on the threshold of the eternal August of the tropic. The warmly cool, clear, ringing, perfumed, overflowing, redundant days were as crystal goblets of Persian sherbet, heaped up, flaked up with rose-water snow. The starred and stately nights seemed haughty dames in jewelled velvets, nursing at home in lonely pride the memory of their absent conquering earls, the golden helmeted suns. For sleeping man 'twas hard to choose between such winsome days and such seducing nights. But all the witcheries of that unwaning weather did not merely lend new spells and potencies to the outward world. Inward they turned upon the soul, especially when the still mild hours of eve came on. Then memory shot her crystals as the clear ice most forms of noiseless twilights, and all the subtle agencies more and more they wrought on Ahab's texture. Old age is always wakeful, as if, the longer linked with life, the less man has to do with aught that looks like death. Among sea commanders, the old greybeards will oftenest leave their berths to visit that night-cloaked deck. It was so with Ahab, only that now of late he seemed too much to live in the open air. Thank you very much. And that truly speaking, his visits were more down to the cabin than from the cabin to the planks. It feels like going down into one's tomb, he would mutter to himself, for an old captain like me to be descending this narrow scuttle to my grave-dug berth. There we go, more cappuccino. Let's have a little sip as we're at the end of the chapter. Yeah, at the end of the paragraph. Lovely. So almost every 24 hours, when the watches of the night were set and the band on deck sentinelled the slumbers of the band below, and when, if a rope was to be hauled upon the forecastle, the sailors flung it not rudely down as by day, but with some cautiousness dropped it to its place, for fear of disturbing their slumbering shipmates. When this sort of steady quietude would begin to prevail, habitually the silent steersman would watch the cabin scuttle, and ere long the old man would emerge, griping at the iron banister. Is it griping or gripping? It's one P. Griping at the iron banister to help him his crippled way. Might be gripping, I suppose. Some considering touch of humanity was in him, for at times like these he usually abstained from patrolling the quarterdeck, because to his wearied mates seeking repose within 6 inches of his ivory heel, such would have been the reverberating crack and din of that bony step, that their dreams would have been of the crunching teeth of sharks. But once the mood was on him too deep for common regardings, and as with heavy lumber-like pace he was measuring the ship from taffrail to mainmast, Stubb, the old second mate, came up from below with a certain unassured, deprecating humorousness, hinted that if Captain Ahab was pleased to walk the planks, then no one could say nay. But there might be some way of muffling the noise, hinting something indistinctly and hesitatingly about a globe of tow, and the insertion into it of the ivory heel. Tow, is that like a kind of a oil or waxy sort of stuff? I'm not sure. Tallow? Ah, Stubb, thou didst not know Ahab then. I am a cannonball, Stubb, said Ahab. That thou wouldst wade me that fashion, but go thy ways, I had forgot. Below to thy nightly grave, where such as ye sleep between shrouds, to use ye to the filling one at last, down dog and kennel. Starting at the unforeseen concluding exclamation of the so suddenly scornful old man, Stubb was speechless a moment, but then said excitedly, I am not used to being spoken to that way, sir. I do but less than half like it, sir. Avast! Gritted Ahab between his set teeth, and violently moving away as if to avoid some passionate temptation. No, sir, not yet, says Stubb, emboldened. I'll not tamely be called a dog, sir. Then be called 10 times a donkey, and a mule and an ass, and begone, or I'll clear the world of thee. As he said this, Ahab advanced upon him with such overbearing terror in his aspect that Stubb involuntarily retreated. Who's this? Right. I was never served so before without giving a hard blow for it, muttered Stubb as he found himself descending the cabin scuttle. It's very queer. Stops, Stubb, somehow now. I don't well know whether to go back and strike him or, what's that, down here on my knees and pray for him. Yes, that was a thought coming up in me, but I would not be for the first time if I ever did pray. It's queer, very queer, and he's queer too, aye. Take him fore and aft, he's about the queerest old man Stubb ever sailed with. And how he flashed at me, his eyes like powder pans. Is he mad? Anyway, there's something on his mind, as sure as there must be something on a deck when it cracks. He ain't in his bed now either, more than 3 hours out of the 24, and he don't sleep then. Didn't that doughboy, the steward, tell me that of a morning he always finds the old man's hammock clothes all rumpled and tumbled, and the sheets down at the floor, and the coverlid almost tied into knots, and the pillow a sort of frightful hot, as though a baked brick had been on it? A hot old man. I guess he's got what some folks ashore call a conscience. It's a kind of a tick-dolly row, as they say. Worse, not a toothache. Nor a toothache, rather. Well, I don't know what it is. But the Lord keep me from catching it. He's full of riddles. I wonder what he goes into a hold for after every night, as Doughboy tells me, as he suspects. What's for that for, I should like to know. Who's made appointments with him in the hold? Ain't that queer now? But there's no telling, it's the old game. Here goes for a snooze. Damn me, it's worth a fellow's while to be born into the world, if only to fall right asleep. And now that I think of it, that's about the first thing babies do, and that's a sort of a queer too. Damn me, but all things are queer, come to think of them. But that's against my principles. Think not is my 11th commandment, and sleep when you can is my 12th. So here goes. But how's that? Didn't he call me a dog? Blazes. He called me 10 times a donkey and piled a lot of jackasses on top of that. He might as well have kicked me and be done with it. Maybe he did kick me. I didn't observe it. I was so taken aback with his brow, somehow, it flashed like a bleached bone. What's the devil's the matter with me? I don't stand right on my legs. Coming afoul of that old man is a sort of turned me wrong side out. By the Lord, I must have been dreaming, though. How? But the only way is to stash it. So here goes to hammock again, and in the morning I'll see how this plaguey juggling thinks over by daylight. End of chapter. I think we've got enough time for chapter 30. The pipe. Now, who was it? Was it Stubbs who was smoking a pipe? Was it first mate, second mate, or third mate? I forget. Was it Starbuck? Perhaps either has a pipe. We'll see. Chapter 30, The Pipe. When Stubbs had departed, Ahab stood for a while leaning over the bulwarks, and then, as had been usual with him of late, called a sailor of the watch, and he sent him below for his ivory stool and also his pipe. So yeah, it must be Stubb, isn't it? Lighting the pipe at the binnacle lamp and planting the stool on the weather side of the deck, he sat and smoked. In all Norse times, the thrones of the sea-loving Danish king were fabricated saith tradition of the tusks of the narwhal. How could one look at Ahab then, seated on that tripod of bones, without bethinking of him, of the royalty it symbolised? For a Khan of the plank, and a king of the sea, and a great lord of Leviathans was Ahab. Some moments passed, during which the thick vapour came from his mouth in quick and constant puffs, which blew back again into his face. "How now?" he soliloquised at last, withdrawing the tube. "This smoking no longer soothes. Oh, my pipe! Hard must it go with me if thy charm be gone. Here have I been unconsciously toiling, not pleasuring, aye, and ignorantly smoking to windward all the while, to windward, and with such nervous whiffs as if, like the dying whale, my final jets were the strongest and fullest of trouble. What business have I with this pipe? This thing is meant for sereneness, to end up mild white vapours among mild white hairs, not among torn iron grey locks like mine. I'll smoke no more." He tossed the still-lighted pipe into the sea. The fire hissed in the waves. Then some instant the ship shot by the bubble the sinking pipe made. With slouched hat, Ahab lurchingly paced the planks. End of chapter. That was short. So Ahab tossing his lighted pipe into the sea. I think that'll do for the moment. Interesting about Ahab. We'll finally meet him, and what's he like? He's a sour man, isn't he? We'll have to see where the comparison to, I think it's Stubbs. But again, some beautiful wires, beautiful writing in there. Very impressive. Don't forget, as always, comment if you wish. Tell me what you're thinking. Don't forget to subscribe to me as well. Down over there. Tap on the face to subscribe to me, and then the bell to get notified whenever I send you a new chapter. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter or Periscope, where you can interact with my live streams and join the 15,000 or so followers I have there, and go walking with me, or play some of the games that I do, some of the quizzes, or Conceptual I Spy that I play sometimes. Have a chat with me in the cafes. All sorts of things there. You might enjoy that if you like listening to me. Yeah, so I will see you for the next chapter or two. Might be somewhere else during the week. It might be next week, back here in the Cloud House in Stow. But thank you for watching for the moment, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye, everybody.